Hi, Donato. It's great to have you on our program here today. Stan gave you a nice warm introduction, but for the rest of those who might not know you as well, please take a minute to share a little bit about your background and some of the work that you're doing.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you for the introduction, Stan. I think Stan gave you a good perspective of my business background. I've been in business for over 40 years, and also have been in the philanthropic arena, started two not-for-profit foundations, Healthy Villages and the TramutoPorter Foundation. However, my most recent work is to really promote this notion of a more compassionate world. And my second book was released 2 years ago in the United States, last year in Italy. And I really do think that for leaders who are aspiring to really drive the kind of sustainable results in organizations, I really find it very rewarding to be able to share with them the mistakes that I have made in my career and what I have learned in terms of the importance of compassion. So it's really great to be here today.
Excellent. Well, that's a perfect segue. Like we can dive right in there. So, how can compassionate leadership improve the emotional well-being of men in the workplace? And what are some of these practical examples of this impact?
Well, it's a great question. And I think we first have to really define and break away the definition of compassionate leadership, which in the book, I do define it as empathy in action. And I think that for, men in particular, I think that, and for myself, I'll use myself as an example because I was a CEO for the greater portion of my career, both in the public and in the private sector, is that we look at compassionate leadership sometimes as weak leadership. And it's not weak, it's actually very strong. And over the course of my career, I had many colleagues who would say to me, that's very weak. Well, let me kind of clear up the muddy water. I was able to make tough decisions. However, I did it using the three T's. The three T's that I introduce in the book is to always start off with tenderness. And that's hard for a man. I mean, you're taught, in the earlier days of your career. Remember, the average age of the CEOs in the United States is 59. So that group has been taught by professors in the 50s and 60s, and that antiquated viewpoint that you have to be tough first is not the right approach. The first T is to use tenderness, to take the time to really understand the stories of your employees to get their trust. And then the third T is tenacity. Then you can be tough. Too many of us go around with a pooper scooper because we use the third T first. We want to be tough. We want to be known as, someone who has had no challenges in their lifetime. And that's just not an approach that works today. So in summary, compassionate leadership is empathy in action. It's no longer good enough for us to say, I feel your pain, or I think I know what's going on in your life. No, you have to take the time to listen to understand as opposed to listening to react, to get that first T to move to trust. And then you can be tough.
That's excellent. I really love that perspective, and certainly have plenty of examples of, signs of compassion or empathy are linked towards weakness. I mean, I think that all of us can relate to that. So I really appreciate that relate that tenderness to tenacity and kind of shape that in terms of, how you use some of these things that you're talking about as strengths and not have them be viewed as weaknesses. And I want to talk a little bit about mental health. So how can compassionate leadership contribute to mental health outcomes for men in high stress environments? What have you seen?
It's a great question. And if you just go back to the three T's, I'll give you a great example. When I was running the public company Tivity Health, I made an acquisition of a company many people know, Nutrisystem. And I was trying to integrate the two teams together. And I was on a plane heading to a meeting, and the doors of the plane had not closed yet. And we got into this discussion between the two teams, Nutrisystem and Tivity Health. And to be honest, I was not practicing the three T's. I started to use aggression with one of the executives, and it was not the right approach. They ended up closing the doors to the plane. And for 3 hours, how do you think I felt? I knew I was wrong. And by the way, compassionate leaders are open to admitting their errors. But for 3 hours, my mental health, my whole spirit had been brought down because I couldn't reach out to this person while I was on the plane to apologize. When that plane landed, I used tenderness. I immediately called that executive and I admitted that I had erred. And we both started to cry and realize that this was a really defining moment. I was able to get her trust. And that's good for your mental health. Otherwise, I would have gone home that night. I would have brought that to the household. I would have had a miserable evening. And so the opportunity to be vulnerable, the opportunity to admit when you have done wrong, and the spirit of an apology is a definition of a great compassionate leader, to acknowledge who you are, to feel confident and comfortable that you can acknowledge your errors. That expands the relationship. Guess what that executive did the next day? That executive went around and it said, I was the first CEO that had ever reached out to her and apologized. And so we have to undo what we have been taught. There's a line in my book that I think people have really, it's through one of the executives that we interviewed, and I love the line: you rent your title, you own your dignity, you own your character. And all of us are going to have many titles in our lifetime. I've been CEO, I've been, on boards, I've been, elected official. Those are all titles, you rent them, but you own your character. And I want to be known someday, and I'm sure those who are involved in this session today, you have to ask yourself, how and what do you want your legacy to be, remembered by? If you wanted to be remembered by someone who was not really, involved in knowing the person, and, you were someone that, promoted a more, aggression in the workplace, I'm not sure that's going to be a great, ending to your career in terms of how you reflect on your, life in your later years. So I do think it does provide an enormous benefit to your overall well-being and your mental health. I really like the person who was speaking before me, that this doesn't happen overnight. I don't think I was always a compassionate leader, and I do err. I am not perfect. However, I'm willing to understand my mistakes. It hurts when somebody does call you out, because if you are a compassionate leader, you take an interest in your development. So you're going to feel some initial pain when somebody says you erred. However, the long-term benefits far outweigh that moment that you feel, oh gosh, I made a mistake.
Yeah, no, I love that. That's such an amazing perspective. And that touches a little bit on the social connection. And it sounds like those who are able to, practice compassionate leadership are going to better connect to those around them. And you're going to share outward those, feelings of trust and, tenacity. Can you talk a little bit more about the physical health? So we've talked about mental health, we talked about connections, but how does it physically affect you if you're a compassionate leader, and what are some of the things that you've noticed where maybe you've got something you notice from your practicing this compassionate leadership that you feel physically better about?
Well, it's a very great question. And for those of you who are listening here today, I speak from the years of experience, having been a CEO. And one of the chapters in the book that I devote to is showing yourself compassion. And I say that because the 41 global leaders that we interviewed, I asked them that question: how do you show yourself compassion? And no one had a good answer. And so I think you have to take time. I now, in my later years at 68 years old, I've now taken up yoga. I should have done that 30 years ago. However, I was under this notion that everything I did had to be for someone else. And I think that it's not wrong. And I admire the young people coming into the workforce. They get it. They understand that we're not guaranteed a tomorrow, and that we need to take the time to show ourselves compassion. We need to make sure it's okay to go out with your family and not look at your email. And so we have to really understand that perspective. And this is why I believe this movement that we have started, and fortunately, it's not just a book, it's a movement. We have been granted National Compassionate Leadership Week now in perpetuity, the second week of September. And we really are. Somebody asked the question, which of the books I'm referring to is the book that I wrote 2 years ago is titled The Double Bottom Line, How Compassionate Leaders Captivate Hearts and Deliver Results. You can get the book on Amazon. But the notion of taking time for yourself is incredibly important for your physical and mental health. And boards, CEOs have to embrace that notion that the person who leaves their home does not leave their problems and concerns and challenges on their doorsteps. They bring them into the workforce, and you should take the initiative to make it safe for them to have to go home if they have an aging parent, to perhaps if they have needs for childcare and they need to drop their child off at 9 o'clock. We need to be flexible and give each individual the time to address their social, their medical, and their physical and their mental health needs.
That's amazing. Yeah, I really appreciate you touching on some of these shifts in the way that workers are viewing the workplace, going from a very rigid, structured, you're there, you try to leave everything at the door, but now it's so integrated with email and access to phones that your work kind of seeps into every part of your life. So I appreciate you as a leader recognizing that, okay, there's going to be times where maybe I can't get to them at all times, which is understandable, even though it feels like you can at any moment pick up your phone and send an email. So I want to get into the harder part of this question. How can leaders themselves adopt some of these practices? So we'll start with just from a leader perspective, how can a leader start? And then let's go into the larger picture, organizations. What can organizations do?
Well, I think the most important thing that a leader can do, and this is probably another 1 week session. I'm going to try to squeeze it all in 1 minute. But I think the first thing is we need to practice listening to understand and not listening to react. And if you look at the political discourse that's going on today, if you look at the confusion that's going on in organizations about how we label the Gen Zers and we label the millennials, we have to stop putting labels on and understand that each segment of a generational movement, they want to be heard. And we need to take the time to listen to the stories from other people. And listening to understand really gets to the heart of connecting with people. And I think that's the first thing we as leaders can really adopt. Don't react. We sometimes see someone, who might, have this belief, and we immediately react without understanding the nature behind their position. 99.8% of our DNA is identical. And when you take the time to really listen to the other person's perspective, you find so much that is in common. And that commonality then leads to the next step of being able to truly lead and manage that individual. It's the way I managed. It's the way I led. I'll share with you a very, business story that people, probably remember. In 2015, when I was appointed CEO of Healthways at the time, there were two divisions. One division was making a lot of money. The other division was losing a lot of money. When you added them together, we were not a profitable company. And I was born at night, but not last night. I knew that we had some serious challenges. And I spent 6 months meeting with every single employee in the organization. Some were one-on-ones. And by the way, at that time, we had 2,300 employees. I was being pressured by Wall Street. I was being pressured by Wall Street to, do something, try to make the company profitable. And what I finally decided is I was going to not follow that approach. I was going to listen to what my employees thought I should do. It took me 6 months, and we did something that I don't think has ever been done. We ended up giving the sub-performing division away to ShareCare. I knew Jeff Arnold at the time, the founder of WebMD. We gave it away with the stipulation that for a year, he could not make decisions on employees. He really needed to understand what to do with the organization. And long and short, we had no havoc. We had employees that gave us thumbs up we brought their insights into the decision. I don't think I would have been able to make that decision by myself. What were the results financially? If you were a shareholder on July 30th, 2016, your stock went from $12 to almost $30. And so you can have profitability and you can do good by listening to people. And there are scores of examples that we extract from the 41 global leaders that we were able to interview. And so listen to understand, don't listen to react. That's probably one of my key messages and the 3 T's that we shared with you, previously.
Amazing. Thank you very much. Well, we appreciate you condensing as much of your book down into 10 to 15 minutes. I will encourage everyone to go buy it and read it. Just an amazing conversation, and hopefully we'll get you back on our program and share some more insights down the road. So thank you again for your time.
Thank you, and you make it a great day now.